This is Mommy Sexual reporting for duty.
This video was brought to you by viewers like you. So essentially I got a request by one of my viewers that goes by the name of Mahou Shoujo Site, who essentially requested that I make a video talking about why the Madoka Magica clones, meaning why did the Dark Magical Girl animes that came after Madoka fail in relationship to being a Madoka Magica clone. Now, I essentially decided to take on this request, and I wanted to use it as an opportunity to talk about why Madoka Magica is superior to the other Dark Magical Girls that came after it. So I decided to start with Mahou Shoujo Site, which is a magical girl anime that came out in 2017, which is essentially edgelord on steroids in relationship to the way that they go about the dark aspects of what goes on in the series in relationship to this main character who gets bullied by essentially every person in plain sight. And I had originally attempted to watch this anime back when it first aired with the intent of reviewing it on this channel. However, after I saw the first few minutes of the first episode, I decided to drop it because I didn't like it. And so when I got this request by Mahou Shoujo Site, I had intended to essentially make a series in which I basically shit on all the magical girl animes that came after Madoka, which are dark. But what's really interesting is that I decided to watch Magical Girl Site because I decided to start with this one first, and I watched it thinking that I was probably going to make a video trashing it, but after basically watching most of it, like I essentially have seen 6 episodes of Mahou Shoujo Site during the time of this recording, and to be quite honest with you, after actually taking the time to watch it, I kind of realized it's not really a bad anime. And it feels weird to say this because my first impressions of Mahou Shoujo Site is that it was terrible. But after taking the time to actually watch it, I realized I can't really make a video in which I'm shitting on it and saying that it's a terrible show. I also don't think it's fair to compare it to Madoka Magica because it's a completely different anime. I mean, you could make the argument that it is copying Madoka because there are various things within this show that remind me of Madoka, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think the show is trying to be like Madoka. At least this is kind of the perspective that I have gained as I've taken the time to watch it. Now, I will say this though, the very first episode of Mahou Shoujo Site does do something very wrong that I think is a big part of the reason why people don't like this show and why it probably gets shit on by a lot of different people. And the one issue that I think Mahou Shoujo Site has is that this anime opens up literally in the very first episode, and we're seeing this girl who is constantly being treated poorly by everyone around her. Now, the reason why I feel like this is an issue is because now, if you think about, and I will make a little comparison to Madoka in order to put this into better perspective. Now, it goes without saying that Madoka Magica does have what you would consider to be tragedy that befalls the characters within the anime. However, the way that the tragedy is set up within Madoka, they essentially introduce us to a bunch of different girls, and we get an opportunity to understand who they are as people, meaning when you think about the fact that we see Madoka and Sayaka at the beginning, we essentially see these two characters as well as the other characters within the series go through as essentially their daily life, in the idea that we learn about who they are, we see them happy, we see them sad, we see them go through different struggles, we see them having to deal with each other. What I'm trying to say is that Madoka Magica does a really great job in showcasing these characters for who they are, and we're able to learn over time that these characters are very human. It's just like with Sayaka, for example. Sayaka starts off the anime as being, you know, very outgoing, very happy, very cheerful. She essentially develops this ambition to want to help her childhood friend and also save people. That's essentially a big part of what makes her who she is. You know, she's been protecting Madoka for basically their whole life. And she really likes the idea of being a hero of justice in the form of a magical girl that fights crime, fights the bad guys, and essentially, you know, does everything that she can in service of people. But obviously, after Sayaka makes her wish, we're able to kind of see that, you know, things don't necessarily go as smoothly as she originally thought that they would. It's like she has the issue with Itomi. She, you know, it's like she really loves this boy, and she has, you know, confident issues in relationship to Itomi because of what Itomi says to her and what Itomi tries to do. And we see Sayaka sort of fall into slow despair over everything that happens. But what I'm trying to say is that when I use Sayaka as an example, Madoka really took time to flesh out her character so that we were able to understand and sympathize with her by the time, you know, things happen in episode 8. It's like a lot of us might not have necessarily gravitated towards Sayaka, but the series presented her in a way where we can understand her story, because logically it makes perfect sense why Sayaka fell into despair given everything that we learned about her leading up to it happening. It's like when you're a teenager and you're dealing with a boy that you like, and you find yourself, you know, comparing yourself to someone else, and if you don't have confidence in yourself, and you know, what I'm trying to say is that Sayaka goes through a lot of things that a lot of us can relate to, and her despair makes perfect sense. It makes sense why she would be depressed in the situation that she was in relationship to Itomi, and in relationship to the wish that she made and discovering all the things about soul gems. So what I'm trying to say is that there was a very slow build from Sayaka, how she started off and where she ultimately goes. Now, one thing about Mahou Shoujo Site that it definitely does not do well in relationship to Madoka is the fact that before we even get a chance to learn anything about the main character within the series, the anime opens up with this character being bullied. It opens up with tragedy in the idea of this one girl whose life is terrible because every single person, from her brother to all the kids at school, she is essentially targeted and just being ridiculed in pretty much every way that you can think of. Now, the reason why I consider this to be an issue for this character and this show is that we're not really made to understand why she's being bullied. We're not made to understand this character upon seeing her be treated poorly. We don't know anything about her. We don't understand why she's being treated this way. We don't understand the nature of the world that she's living in. Now, again, if I compare this to Madoka, Madoka did eventually move into the idea of making characters suffer, but that really didn't happen until we began to learn something about who they were. In most cases, what I'm trying to say is that there was always a certain amount of build-up to the tragic events that happened, which by the time they did happen for each character, we were essentially able to learn something about them, which is why when something bad did happen to them, we were able to sympathize and connect with it. In Mahou Shoujo Site's case, we didn't get that. We essentially just got this girl, and the series doesn't bother to explain to us why this girl is being bullied, why this girl is being treated poorly, and we can't really see anything in relationship to her character that would suggest why she's being treated the way that she does. It's almost as if, you know, they wanted to make a story about a girl being, you know, treated bully for the sake of doing it and not give us any rhyme or reason. So therefore, at least in my case, I wasn't able to really sympathize as much as I did in relationship to the Madoka characters, so that's why I personally could not get into it. Now, I just want to clarify that I do know that Mahou Shoujo Site does technically explain things later down the track, and I'm going to make another video where I sort of get a little bit more in depth on my feelings in relationship to this anime, because I do feel like the first episode can give the impression that this anime is terrible, because as I said, rather than take the time to develop its characters, like its main characters, and helping us to learn who they are and helping us to understand, you know, why things are the way that they are within this world, it essentially just jumps straight into the tragedy, dark aspects of the show, seemingly for the sake of just being dark. Now, again, I know that this is something that can throw people off. It threw me off. It wasn't until I got past these episodes, like I essentially had to watch it with a friend, and it wasn't until I got to episode 4 that I began to understand and I guess slowly start to like this show a little bit more, because over time you start to learn more about the characters. But I still think that even though this anime begins to solve this problem later on, I still feel like that they should have found a way to help us to understand and learn about the main character before we saw her going through her tragic moments. I believe that if they had did this first, it probably would have helped this show a lot more in relation. In other words, it would have been more impactful to see this girl go through what she goes through if we had the opportunity to get to know who she was as a person. Like if we learned about maybe what her dreams were, or if we learned about, you know, why she is the way that she is and why she's being treated at the very beginning. I think that it could have solved a lot of the issues that people had with this anime. And Yuki Aya, to be quite honest with you, doesn't even have any characteristics with her as a character that help us to understand why she would be treated this way when we first watched the anime. You know, it's just like, one thing about bullying is that a lot of times people get bullied because something about them makes them stand out in relationship to society. It's just like how, you know, you might be somebody that gets bullied because you look a certain way that happens to be different from how most people might look, or because you might like a certain thing and other people don't like the thing that you like and they think that it's weird that you like what you like. What I'm trying to say is that people normally get bullied because there's something about them that might stand out in relationship to the status quo. That's usually how it starts. Like, for example, I was bullied in my life when I was a kid because I was overweight, and most of the people in my life, in my school, basically weren't. So I feel like that, you know, if you're somebody who's, you know, this is why people who are overweight can sometimes be targeted by people who may not be when you're in school. That was something that I personally went through. But in Yuki Aya's case, as a character, like if you look at her character design and her personality, there's nothing about her physical appearance or the way that she is as a person which really would explain why she's being bullied in this particular anime at the very beginning. I mean, you can't say that she was bullied because she was shy or quiet. I don't feel like that is enough of a reason for somebody to be bullied, personally. Now, which is a little bit of a contradiction, because I do understand that when you're shy, some people can kind of take that and interpret it the wrong way, but I don't feel like it justifies the type of treatment that Aya went through. So, yeah. As I said, I wanted to make a video talking, you know, trash about why Mahou Shoujo Site was not a good anime in relationship to Madoka. But after I watched the first episode, I was prepared to do that. But as I got further into it, I realized this is actually not a bad show, and I don't even think it's fair to compare it to Madoka in the first place. You know, to be quite honest with you, I feel like if people can get past the first 3 episodes of Mahou Shoujo Site, and I think that as long as they don't try to compare it to Madoka, I think that there are ways that you probably could enjoy this show. You know, Mahou Shoujo Site tends to focus a lot on the plot more so than the characters. Like, the characters in Mahou Shoujo Site are only in this anime to drive the plot to where it needs to go. Unlike a show like maybe Madoka that really puts a lot of emphasis on these characters. I mean, obviously the plot is important, the story is important, but the characters play a very big role in why things happen the way that they do. You know, it's just like you know, Madoka Magica has little mini arcs where it's really focusing a lot on the main characters. Like, you could say the first arc was the Mommy arc, then after that it became the Sayaka arc, and then after that it became a little bit of the Kyoko arc, and then it became Homura, and Madoka essentially got her time at the end. So this was a very character-driven story in many ways. Mahou Shoujo Site is definitely not that, but I don't necessarily feel like it needs to be. I think that how Mahou Shoujo Site goes about its anime is perfectly fine. Maybe not for everybody, but I can, at the very least, I can watch that show and kind of see, you know, that it's not bad for what it's doing. And again, I don't think it's a Madoka copycat, though I will acknowledge that it does take some aspects of Madoka. Like, for example, the whole idea of why the girls have their powers, because Mahou Shoujo Site is essentially a magical girl survival battle royale where the characters are made to fight each other. Eventually, they discover that the powers that they were given, it's just basically some kind of a conspiracy plot where they're being made to fight each other for the sake of this organization that is working behind the scenes that made them have these powers in the first place. and they essentially have this dark reveal of this being the case, which is kind of similar to the reveal of Soul Gems and Kyubey in relationship to Madoka. So that is one aspect that's a little similar. The fact that there is this really strong character that they have to eventually face that is going to be like the strongest within the city is kind of similar to the idea of Walpurgis Notch and the fact that the girls have to fight it within Madoka Magica. So that's obviously a similarity. You could essentially say the main character is similar to Madoka in the idea of them being timid and weak at the beginning of the series, you know, being not so confident, being unsure of themselves. And you can essentially say the character that ends up helping them is very similar to Homura, and the idea that Homura was essentially Madoka's protector and the one that had that who could do time magic, which is similar to how the secondary girl in Mahou Shoujo Site is, because she can also use time magic just like Homura. So what I'm trying to say is that you could look at Mahou Shoujo Site and Madoka and see that there are a lot of similarities, which might be a reason why people compare these two together, which makes perfect sense. But again, I just feel like if you go into the show trying to compare it to Madoka and try to rip it apart for being a show that didn't meet your expectations because you wanted it to be like Madoka, then of course you're going to be disappointed, because comparison is the greatest thief of joy. The moment that you start to compare something, you start to no longer be able to take it for what it is and see the value within the show itself, because you're too busy wanting it to be something else that it essentially is not. So Mahou Shoujo Site, in my opinion, should not be compared to Madoka. I feel it should be taken for what it is. It technically is a show that could have been better in relationship to how it starts, but at the same time, it's not terrible for what it's able to do. Now, if I was in control of Mahou Shoujo Site, rather than starting it off with the main character being bullied, I would have created a situation for us to be able to sympathize with the character by building up who she is and helping us to learn about, you know, why she's being bullied, why she is the way that she is, why the world that she lives in is filled with crazy people. I would, if I had creative control over Mahou Shoujo Site, I would create a situation in which we're able to learn about the main character so that we can sympathize with her. So by the time that the bullying came, it would actually have an impact on us, and it wouldn't just feel like it was kind of shoveled in for the sake of, you know, shocking us or surprising us. You know, that's what I would have done, and I think that the show would have been infinitely better had they did this. So yeah, that's essentially my take on Mahou Shoujo Site in the idea of it being a fail dark magical girl show. I was going to shit on it, and then I realized it's not a terrible show, and I actually kind of like it. It feels weird to say that because for the longest time I had a very negative bias toward this show, but after taking the time to watch it, I realized it's not that bad. So if you watch Mahou Shoujo Site, try to go into it with an open mind. Don't make a comparison of it being like Madoka, because it's not Madoka. It does definitely take a lot of what Madoka did, but I still think that the show is good for what it's trying to portray. It's basically a plot-centered anime which only uses the characters within the show to advance the plot. It's not a show where you're going to get a whole lot of understanding and depth in relationship to these characters, because that's not what the show is trying to do. It's not trying to help us. It's not trying to create a situation where we're made to really sympathize and feel a connection with these characters. It's meant to present a scenario of these girls in this environment where they have to fight each other and ultimately work together in order to deal with the issues of the conspiracy behind their powers and whoever created the very nature of the survival game that they have to go through. That's what this anime is essentially about. So if you take it for that, rather than taking it for what you think it should be or what you think it should be trying to do, then I think that you will probably enjoy it a lot more. So that's basically it. You know, I'm probably going to do more videos on the subject of other dark magical girls. I don't necessarily know if I'm going to compare them to Madoka. I may attempt to try to look at what these shows have done, and I might try to, whatever points that I try to make about this show, because I do think that a lot of people like to give other dark magical girl animes a bad rep. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to review the other Dark Magical Girl shows and feel the same way about them as I did about Mahou Shoujo Site, but I definitely will watch these shows and try to give some type of review or analysis on what I think of them, and if there's a way that they could be improved, and maybe I can dispel why some people might think that these shows are trash compared to Madoka, or maybe I'll come up with a way to justify it. I don't know, but I'm probably going to make more videos talking about, other Dark Magical Girl shows. So yeah, if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and I'll catch you in the next video. I also want to thank Maisun for requesting that I do this video, because if it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't have ever attempted to watch Mahou Shoujo Site, and I would have just walked away thinking, oh, this is a terrible, shitty anime. But because of her request, I was able to spend more time, really trying to understand this show, which in turn has helped me to gain more appreciation for it. Though I do apologize if this video wasn't what you necessarily wanted it to be, Maisun, because as I said, I came into it thinking I was going to trash it, and then after I tried to understand it, I realized this is not a bad show. It's just people making comparisons to it is probably why they don't like it. I don't feel like you should compare this show to another. I think it's better to try to see what they're doing. Now, again, I did acknowledge in this video what I consider to be some fatal flaws as to why people tend to give this show a terrible rep. So yeah, that's basically it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you later. Peace out!